Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound, 28, Blake, Fire-Fugue of Delight. Blake's Albion as Rebel Orc, dated 1780 but engraved 10 years later, announces a threefold prophecy. 1. Innocence. In the glad day of free desire, everything that lives is holy. Let the slave grinding at the mill run out into the field. Let him look up into the heavens and laugh in the bright air. His chains are loose, his dungeon doors are open, for empire is no more, and now the lion and wolf shall cease. 2. Experience. In the material world, that proclamation of hope enters an orc cycle, an eternal fall, as from Lucifer to Satan, serpent-formed, lover of wild rebellion, and transgressor of God's law. Where Rintrah roars and shakes his fires, freedom, equality, and brotherhood can only shade into terror. The winepress of Los is called war on earth. 3. Regeneration. In this plate from Blake's last prophetic book, Jerusalem, the orc Albion of his rebel youth turns the cruciform joy toward Christ self-sacrificed on the tree of prohibition. These are not, and that is the crux of Blake's prophecy, Hegelian sequences of time, but simultaneous states of every clarified vision. Thus the arm-spread gesture is preserved through the snake-wrapped fall into our cramped ulro of imbruted sense and mind's repression, a complicity of Blake Orc, Satan, and Christ, Lover, King of Love, thou art the King of Rage and Death, and the Lamb of God, clothed in Luva's robes, already shown in the glad day under which Blake would write, after 1800, Albion arose from where he labored at the mill with slaves. Giving himself for the nations, he danced the dance of eternal death. In his break with the Venetian oiled shadowing of his own time, go send your children to the slobbering school, Blake claimed the clarity and defining line of Renaissance, Michelangelo and Raphael, the canons of intellectual form. A tear is an intellectual thing. Here he turns the proportions of anatomy as formulated by Vitruvius and drawn by Leonardo and Dürer into a leap of freedom. Similarly, in the revolutionary fugue, Baroque discipline heightens the defiance of release. First Haydn's Opus 20 makes the old order spirit's battleground. 16 years later, Mozart took off in his fiercest fugue, the C minor of 1788. Beethoven climaxed the sequence in the Grosse Fuge of 1825. That fugal energy presupposes the inwrought joy of conflict. At the height of the illustrations for Job, the outcast of Uz, with whom Blake increasingly identified, that I cannot live without doing my duty to lay up treasures in heaven, I have long made up my mind, and why this should be made an objection to me, while drunkenness, lewdness, gluttony, and even idleness itself does not hurt other men, let Satan himself explain. Job sees his cloud cave of misery and false friends embraced in the cruciform likeness of his divine imagination, with sun, reason, and passion moon, and above the eternal singing of the morning stars. Such the vision of which Blake wrote to Butts, the patron who, as Palmer would testify, for years stood between the greatest designer in England and the workhouse, till the jewels of light, heavenly men, beaming bright, appeared as one man, who complacent began my limbs to enfold in his beams of bright gold. In the engraved plate, Leviathan coils in the margin below, while the next design shifts the threefold scheme downward. Job's God above points through this cloud hollow to the depths of our subconscious Egypt, the time and space sea of war and repression. Behold now Behemoth and Leviathan, which I made with thee. For Blake, judgment is the ecstasy which subsumes all that. It is not, as with the orthodox, even Michelangelo, a post-temporal reward or punishment. Whenever any individual rejects error and embraces truth, a last judgment passes upon that individual. The whole rejection of materialism and jealous condemnation of bad art and science, and the emergence of energy as eternal delight, swirls as within a symbolic skull around the forgiveness of the redeemed humanity. Mental things alone are real. Error or creation will be burned up, and then, and not till then, truth or eternity will appear. It is burnt up the moment men cease to behold it. Those thrown down on Christ's left are not vicious persons, but states signified by those names, stations through which individuals pass. The whirling of that judgment within that deep-browed head set Blake further from the life, for him the death, of his time than any other creator has ever been. I am laid by in a corner as if I did not exist. Profit never ventures upon my threshold, though every other man's doorstone is worn down into the very earth by the footsteps of the fiends of commerce. There, elation. I have conquered and shall go on conquering. Nothing can withstand the fury of my course among the stars of God and in the abysses of the accuser. And loss. Tuesday, January 20th, 1807, between 2 and 7 in the evening, despair. With cheerful work, in Palmer's words, practically sane, steady, frugal, and industrious, and in Blake's letters, I go on merrily with my Greek and Latin, am now learning my Hebrew. I read Greek as fluently as an Oxford scholar. I live by miracle. I am painting small pictures from the Bible. The ruins of time builds mansions in eternity. Sustained those enjoyments of genius, which in the marriage of heaven and hell look like torment and insanity. So Leigh Hunt of the 1809 exhibition. William Blake, an unfortunate lunatic whose personal inoffensiveness secures him from confinement, fancies himself a great master, and has painted a few wretched pictures, unintelligible allegory, very badly drawn, of which he has published a catalogue, the wild effusions of a distempered brain. So Wordsworth, shown the songs of innocence and experience 35 years after their appearance, Blake still producing in always more divine obscurity. There is no doubt this poor man was mad, but there is something in the madness of this man which interests me more than the sanity of Lord Byron and Walter Scott. The price in that Augustan extension of Baroque and Enlightenment, of Blake's personal reshaping of radical Christianity. Since what had come to dominance in Christendom was the secular antithesis, the rational, realist, and assertive pomp of Bernini's Louis XIV, in thought, this Newtonian phantasm, this Voltaire and Rousseau, this Hume and Gibbon and Bolingbroke, this natural religion, covering cherubs of the tabernacle of Bacon, Newton, and Locke. We cannot know if Blake, who sang his lyrics to his own tunes, would have specified also the music which Europe was vaulting to the keystone of Handel's Messiah, though he implies as much. Music as it exists in old tunes or melodies is inspiration. Demonstration, similitude, and harmony are objects of reasoning. A grandeur the great Duke of Marlborough turned on its origins in the Battle of Blenheim, as in the monstrous palace so named he outflanked the vaunts of Louis. In the 100-year shift from Baroque through neoclassic to revolutionary, what David's mounted Napoleon charges with romantic impulse is the old assertion. Still for Blake, Urizen's conquest of the space-plotted material earth. Let each choose one habitation, one curse, one weight, one measure, one king, one god, one law. In Cherubini, whom Napoleon asked why his music was so Germanic, complex, and noisy, the crescendo of Haydn and Mozart swells toward Beethoven. Yet the very fugues we earlier compared with Blake coil in that plot we have called his antithesis. As he himself wrote, I must invent a system or be enslaved by another man's. How roundly our Western equestrians converge in formulable consciousness. A contrast will reveal. This mounted warrior from South India about 50 years before the Bernini Louis XIV. Its huge energies are mythopoetic. Of course it exists in space and time, but not as determined there. Its battle is of another realm than Marlborough's at Blenheim or Napoleon's crossing the Alps. With Blake, Western temporality seeks such a realm. Though leaping eternal horses illuminate his pages, it is hard to think Blake could have mounted monumental Pegasus, even had he been commissioned, as he proposed, to fresco the halls of England. Beethoven commissioned by Count Razumovsky. Blake's most public designs were this Nelson guiding Leviathan and Pitt guiding Behemoth, inspired, the descriptive catalogue tells us, by Asiatic and biblical originals seen in vision, source of all Greece and Rome ode to the muse of memory. Here, as in those wonderful originals, more is meant than meets the eye. Nelson is hero in the ambivalent mode of Urizen's sterile delimiter. Father of jealousy, be thou accursed from the earth. He stands on the serpent of rational and material power, which Job would see in the abyss. It wreathes and swallows the nations, reigned by the haloed British angel of establishment. Then was the serpent temple formed, image of infinite shut up in finite revolutions, and man became an angel, heaven a mighty circle turning, God a tyrant crowned. The French have submitted to paradox only in their broken Pascalian phase. English empiricists and Newtonians eschew it, Berkeley as rationally as any. Impossible, even for an infinite mind, to reconcile contradictions. But the Italo-Germans, from Bruno through Leibniz to Schelling, burn in the flame of mating opposites. Where they systematize paradox, Blake intuitively rides it. Without contraries is no progression. In his Mooney Beulah, contrarieties are equally true. Far more in the great wars of eternity, in fury of poetic inspiration. At the judgment close of Jerusalem, with the eternal forms of nature and life, even Bacon, Newton, Locke, fourfold clarified, awaking to immortality, Blake sees the all-wondrous serpent, clothed in gems and rich array, humanize. So in the Dante engraving of Paolo and Francesca, at the end of Blake's life, it is as the coiled, suppressed snake of the marriage of heaven and hell, advancing toward us with all the fury of a spiritual existence, that the whirlwind sucks up lovers from stormy Ulro, a fugal flame of bondage, tilted skyward like a vine. While Dante swoons under the radiant kiss to the ground of repressive thorns. Blake was 33 when he began The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. As a new heaven is begun, and it is now 33 years since its advent, the eternal hell revives, taking his own birth for the fulfillment of a Swedenborgian prophecy. Blake, stretched at the top of the page in the delight of creative fire, and below, attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence. The page epitomizes Blake, both accepting and at war with the poised antinomies, innocence and experience, the kiss of joy, the birth in pain. From his earliest years, Blake was compelled to frame existence in recurrent wheels of 2, 3, and 4, and yet to give himself in impassioned identification to a freedom that defies them. Of these elements, water, earth, air, fire, prototypes of his later life powers, the Zoas, it is Blake's destiny to be fire, yet linked with the others in vital strife, as in Mozart's C minor fugue, a frenzy almost intolerable to Hegelian programmers. Such, in Urizen, is the petrifaction of body through 7 ages of dismal woe, a roof shaggy, wild, enclosed in an orb, his fountain of thought. Or in the metal traveler, the reciprocating historical guiles, from burning babe and woman old, through freezing age and female babe, back to frowning babe and woman old. She nails him down upon the rock, and all is done as I have told. This is the material world created in one sense by demonic Elohim, but more deeply by Los and Jesus as an act of mercy, to stay the fall toward eternal death, weaving for the fallen a protective garment of generation. It is the hell to which Dante in Luva's red robe must be led by Virgil in the blue of loss. Its four continents appear through flame, and under the sea of time and space, the lost Atlantis of our unity, infinite mountains of light now barred out by the Atlantic Sea. When the five senses whelmed in deluge over the earth-born man. Dante's giants deep in hell become for Blake those five earth-sunk senses, giant beauty and perfection fallen into dust, when man closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. Only touch, hardly differentiated here, opening through the entire body into the ecstasy of sex. The lust of the goat is the bounty of God, yet smitten like Job with boils, Tyriel's fifth daughter, left alive, but with her hair turned to snakes. Only touch affords a model for cleansing the rest. The whole creation will be consumed and appear infinite and holy, whereas it now appears finite and corrupt. This will come to pass by an improvement of sensual enjoyment. Yet the giants brood, whelmed in hell, like pot-bellied Hume, concerning human understanding. There appears not throughout all nature any one instance of connection which is conceivable by us. And Blake, doubt, and don't believe without experiment. Blake's hell was just the Enlightenment court painters of the 18th century were celebrating, as Battoni did this earlier Razumovsky with his classics and copies of classics. Blake, the silly Greek and Latin slaves of the sword. We do not want either Greek or Roman models if we are but just and true to our own imaginations. The displayed medals for royal intrigue, Lord Chesterfield to his son. I recommended to you in my last an innocent piece of art, that of flattering people behind their backs, in presence of those who will not fail to repeat and even amplify the praise to the party concerned. Chesterfield, who, as Johnson observed, taught the morals of a whore in the style of a dancing master. Your dancing master, he wrote that son, is at this time the most useful and necessary of all the masters you have or can have. While the Earl of Shaftesbury extended the decorum of dress to literature, I hold it very indecent that a man should publish his meditations or solitary thoughts. These are the froth and scum of writing, which should be unburdened in private and consigned to oblivion before the writer come before the world as good company. Against that old regime of form, this Reynolds, 1787 defender of Gibraltar, seems to herald the new republic of humanity, as if Lord Heathfield were George Washington, roused by the strains of Lallan Burns, Scots wha hae wi Wallace bled, lay the proud usurper low, tyrants fall in every foe, liberties in every blow, let us do or die. Yet Reynolds was Blake's despised priest of establishment. This man was hired to depress art, a pretense of art to destroy art. Reynolds or Chesterfield, Whig or Tory, all shared the enlightened fabric Blake had pursued from childhood with contempt and abhorrence. Montesquieu. Of the necessary tie between laws and the constitution of each government, of its manners, climate, religion, commerce. While Blake, Los Orc, striding in flame, cries what his cry almost makes true. Ages are all equal, but genius is always above the age. Yet in what sense above the age, where the cruciform gesture of delight hardens to the vulture oppression of hand, Jerusalem's news of freedom, script for a reign of terror. Rebellion struck the tyrant dead, became a tyrant in his stead. Thus the fugal play of the first Razumovsky turns to the time tangle of the hammer clavier, of all late Beethoven fugues, as when Schindler visited in 1819 and heard from the next room the hammerings and howlings of the Missa Solemnis Creed. The door opened and Beethoven stood before us with distorted features, as if he had been in mortal combat with the whole host of contrapuntists, his everlasting enemies. The rational mode of that crisis had been satire, the acid of Swift, which spills into the new century most fiercely in Goya, this matrimonial folly from the Proverbs. Blake, too, had begun with satire, in An Island in the Moon. Hail, matrimony, maid of love, to thy wide gates how great a drove on purpose to be yoked do come, widows and maids and youths also, that lightly trip on beauty's toe, or sit on beauty's bum. No doubt all Blake's Ulro pictures have that cutting edge, and in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, the 7 church houses of brick in which monkeys, baboons, and all of that species are grinning and snatching at one another, the weak caught by the strong, and with a grinning aspect first coupled with and then devoured, as recklessly envenoms